My name is Winston Tong. My name is Winston Tong. My name is Winston Tong. Will the real Winston Tong please stand up? So, I was named Winston after Mr. Churchill. Of course, he being quite the popular fellow at the turn of the century, I mean the early 50s. Excuse me, I always forget how old I am. No one believes me when I tell them anyway, so I'm not going to tell you. You'll find out in your own mean little way anyway, I suppose. Tong, of course, is the name of one of the great dynasties of China, and it happens to be the generic name of the Chinese people as a whole. I was born in white America of Chinese parents who met there, fleeing the revolution in China. My first recollection is of the sun pouring down on me. A lovely afternoon, me in my diapers, jumping with joy in the crib. Unforgettable, that. People don't believe me when I tell them that I remember that. And perhaps I don't. Perhaps it's just the photograph I still have of that moment that allows me to believe that I remember such a thing. The next most significant thing that happened to me was getting beaten up the first day at school. I'd never run around on the street before going to kindergarten, you see, and the other boys had. They'd formed quite a street gang by the time I came into the schoolyard on the first day of school, there in my camel hair coat and my shorts, looking quite the alien compared to them in their dungarees and plaid shirts, flannel shirts. So they beat me up quite brutally. I lost 2 front teeth and bled all over the place. My mother came and cried and screamed in shock, and I laughed all the way through that ordeal. I laughed quite a lot. I talked too much, too. I was called a chatterbox on my report cards. Parental discipline was advised severely many times. Didn't stop me, though. I drew suns in my drawing classes with smiling faces, and I remember being forced to look up at the sun, eyes wide open, to check to see if indeed the sun had a smiling face on it. My, those teachers were cruel. There were some nice ones, though. I took the violin up at the tender age of 9, I believe. Gave it up at the much more tender age of 11, much to the chagrin of my parents. Such is the lot of all parents who wish their children to have developing musical talent. No, my musical influences didn't come from the pieces of Bach we had to play in music class. My influence came from the radio, AM radio. I used to go to sleep as a teenager with the earplug in my ear and listen to KSFO or some station like that all night long. I'm sure that's where I've gotten my knack for writing pop songs today. From all those subconscious reveries, night after night, under the covers, with Motown and those damn hippies. Speaking of damn hippies, I ended up being quite the classic one in my day. I was even in the San Francisco tribe of hair, but that was quite the cultural phenomenon for its time. I don't regret having done it. Quite an education, after all. Then I went to art school. Wonderful time. 25 hours a day of rigorous training in the theatrical arts. By then I'd lived through several earthquakes. As you well know, California is terribly prone to earthquakes. When the last one hit, I was on the verge of suicide, having finished my first year of art school. I think a lot of kids were in the same state. It's pretty tough. Pretty tough imagining how to be a superior artist. But we were being taught by real artists who knew what real life was all about. When I left school, my mentor, the first woman in America to have played Mother Courage, Beatrice Manley Blau, said, "Dear, never forget this. Art is life, and your life is art." I stared at the ceiling. Then she said, "Don't do anything, please. It will happen." And puzzled as a Chinese box, I left school, tried to figure out what she was talking about for years, and then it did happen. It happened. I started doing it without having planned anything. I did my first performance in San Francisco, where I was born. My performances were a crossbreed of theatrical event and conceptual art performance. I found the one mere entertainment and the other one much too lofty and snobbish to do much for the average mind. So my work was an attempt to fuse the two extremes. And as things went, was quite successful. At the same time, I joined Tuxedo Moon, became a singer, which was something I'd always wanted to do. sang my guts out. I remember one of the first nights somebody screaming, "Get that fucking Chinaman off the stage. He's yelling. He ain't singing, he's yelling." Which didn't do very much for my mental stability, but I overcame it, as I am able to overcome most everything. Eventually, I got to know Europe quite well, because I started to do grand tours of performances, and after a while, Tuxedo Moon decided to take up residence in Europe. So we all packed up our bags as Ronald Reagan was sworn into office and made our new home in the old world. I still don't know quite what to make of this move. In many ways, I feel that it's something of a step backwards. When I went to Japan last year, I felt that I'd come home for the first time in my life, because the culture there seemed to be so satisfying to me. But that's probably because it is what I am. A mixture of Eastern and Western cultures, counterbalancing and poised against each other in the most terrifying and beautiful way. Which brings us up to the present moment, in which I am nothing more or less than a citizen of the world, working where I can, doing what I can. Winston Tong, theoretically Chinese. That happens to be the name of my first album. And my desire is that what it reveals will please and inspire. That's it for now.